Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Godbreaker Mage, written by PerilousPlatypus. Clazen watched. There were so many things to see, particularly for one whose eyes had been opened as Clazen's had. The path to awareness was a long one, measured across the many generations of his family. Each person in that chain had done their part, carefully cultivating the magic within them and ensuring that it was properly passed on. This was the way to true power. This was the way to magic that reached beyond the world and into the many worlds connected to it. This ability was new to humanity. For so long, magic had been caged, held fast by the gods who drained this world of its resources. Earth's mana was stolen. Its magic users culled before the seed within them blossomed. It was only in secret that this power could be cultivated. Only in the remote holds in the blasted wastes could humanity slowly gather its strength. When Clazen's eyes opened, all things impossible became possible. The gods became vulnerable. At long last, a Godbreaker Mage, one who could finally free humanity from its shackles. Beside Clazen stood a woman, wizened and crippled. Time had been unkind to her body. Her mind shined still. She watched Clazen just as Clazen watched the fabric of reality. Occasionally she tutted, shaking her head slightly. No, not him, not yet. Clazen grimaced, frustrated. Why, I am powerful enough. She smiled at her son. He was not wrong, but he was not right either. This is not the question of power. It is a question of the proper ordering of things, of removing the cancer infecting our world without killing the patient. Slaying Anima would remove our greatest tumor, but we would not survive it. We must nibble at the edges first, cut away the lesser gods and increase our own resources, put ourselves in the place of these false idols, and restore humanity to self-determination. These were not words Clazen wanted to hear. He was young and impatient. He lusted for the grand confrontation, for true justice, not the slaying of pitiful demigods. But his mother had always been his guide, and he was loath to disappoint her. It was she that showed him the path to enlightenment. It was she that had taught him how to open his eyes. He wondered, not for the first time, why she had not done so for herself. He had asked once, and had received only a thin grin in response. Then, a ripple, a wave coursing through the fabric as it was pierced. A gate from a world beyond as a god made their way to this world. Clazen to feel the contours of the gate, the signature. Beside him, his mother tensed, her thin, bony fingers grasping his wrist. Yes, him, she hissed. Go. Clazen nodded, his hands reaching down to pull the stream of mana from the vast vat sitting behind his chair. His mother would aid in protecting it, as would the others in his retinue, but it would still be his greatest weakness. He pulled the mana into him, connecting his body to the river flowing from the vat. The blue ether pulsed in time with his heart as power filled him. With each passing moment, he felt his magic well up within him. So many things sharpened when he drew upon his family's store. But it came at a cost. Mana was precious. Every droplet was worth kingdoms. When he drew upon it, he must make the most of it, conserving what he could. God hunting was a terribly expensive business. Clazen raised his left hand, 2 fingers extended in a vertical slice. A rent in the fabric appeared as a small window between places was carved open. The same hand now sliced horizontally, expanding the window. Then he stood and approached the incision. He reached out with 2 hands and pulled apart the seams of reality, opening a portal large enough to travel through. His retainers moved quickly, their own magic fortifying the boundaries of the portal, ensuring they would not collapse and separate Clazen from the flow of mana from the vat. His mother gave him a small bow. Fight well, son. A victory against Gonchan, the keeper of many things, will alter much in this battle. He should not have come, Clazen replied. They are hungry and arrogant. Their dead brothers and sisters can convince them for only so long. Good luck. Clazen nodded and then stepped through the portal. He now stood in a vast throne room, an entire wall open to the air with a view of the vast city beyond. The entire city was nestled between the peaks of 2 mountains. Atop the taller of the two peaks was a massive golden temple. Clazen was familiar with the place. His tutors had taken care to instruct him on all of humanity's gods' cities. This was Gonjian, capital of the High Shelf. This was the seat of the power of Gonchan, the heart of the land that worshipped him, tithing their mana to him. Commotion commenced shortly after Clazen arrived. Dozens of bodies moved to intercept him as a shrill cry rose above the ruckus. "Intruder, protect the king!" Clazen watched them come, curious. He had been to many different lands, and he always found it curious how many things remained the same, despite the distance between them. All reacted much the same way to unexpected events, treating every surprise as a threat. It wasn't an odd reaction, and the King's Guard of Gonjian were to be commended for their discipline and speed. But it was still disappointing, and a waste of mana. "Stop," Clazen said, raising his hand. His fingers now danced in front of him, directing streams of mana out. Within moments, the King's Guard was subdued. The joints of their armor melded together. They tottered for a few steps, and then toppled over. It would take considerable time and access to a blacksmith to remove them from the makeshift prisons. Grumbling, Clazen turned to the king. He expected a man, but found a boy, cowering atop an ornate, gold-encrusted throne. Clazen frowned. "Where is your father?" He searched his memory for the name and found it buried in a dusty corner, filled with history lessons from Scholar Hacken. "Yennis." The boy swallowed, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Dead. "Fine. You are King Flerhag." It was a terrible name, but Clazen saw little purpose in pointing it out. The new king had enough problems. Besides, Flerhag probably already knew that. "King Flerhag, I'm here for Gonchan. I suggest that you and your troops remain here." His eyes widened. "Lord Gonchan, he's returned. It's been so long." A loud gong rang out from the temple above, reverberating through the valley, announcing the arrival of the god into his domain. Clazen arched a brow and pointed in the direction of the temple. "I'll make my way to him now," he began, to make his way across the throne room towards the massive set of doors emblazoned with the symbol of a giant beast. It looked vaguely like a cross between a dragon and a cat. Gonchan. Flerhag swallowed. "Who are you?" He moistened his lips. "What are you?" Clazen paused. "I am the Godbreaker, Clazen." "Godbreaker?" Flerhag repeated, trying to understand, but he would not. Not until Clazen had done what he had come here to do. There was no concept for a Godbreaker in Gonjian. There were only gods, but they would soon learn enough. Before Flerhag could say more, Clazen was at the door. He pushed his palm out in front of him, and the doors slammed open, flying off their hinges and careening up the stairs beyond. He spared a brief glance back at the portal behind him and the thin stream of mana flowing through it. Members of the retinue were making their way through the portal, their shields marked with the Godbreaker crest. They took guard beside the portal, their faces grim. Seeing no reason not to trust the matter to them, Clazen reached to the smooth wall beside him. A hand of carved stone reached out of the wall and grasped his own. A moment later, Clazen was lifted up and then pulled along as the hand ascended the stairway. As much as he would like to float up the stairs, being dragged up by a wall hand was far more efficient. Perhaps, once he had access to more sources of mana, he could use it on luxuries. Just before the top of the stairway, the hand let him go, depositing him in front of the second set of massive doors. These too are subjected to the same treatment, blowing outwards and off their hinges, slamming into the temple entryway beyond. Screams rang out as attendants fled his arrival. Ahead, Clazen could see Gonchan stirring, awakening to his presence. Clazen wished that he could have simply opened a portal directly to the god, but it was too dangerous. Until the portal was well fortified, it was easy to attack, just as Gonchan's portal was right now. Clazen could feel the gate in the room beyond the entryway. The god had left it open, but had not protected it. Clazen wondered at the carelessness of the gods. Perhaps they had been too long unchallenged in their power to be anything other than thoughtless. But it still surprised him. Clazen had already killed 3 lesser gods. One would think that might create a reaction. But preferences created patterns, patterns settled into habits, habits were difficult to root out. Well, it was to Clayton's advantage. He crouched down, and 2 hands of polished marble reached up and lay a hold of his feet and ankles, yanking him forward and through the entryway. To either side loomed massive carved statues of Gonchan, the keeper of many things. All these depicted was a mass of mouths, each open and waiting. The doors ahead, towering and fortified, strained and then gave way at his approach. Clayton was a Godbreaker, and barriers, regardless of their craft, would not keep him from his objective. As the doors swung inward, cracking on their hinges, they revealed the room beyond. It was an enormous space, dappled with ornate columns supporting a ceiling hundreds of feet above. The center of the chamber was dominated by a massive pool, bubbling and roiling from the heat of 100 unseen furnaces below. All along the periphery of the room were shelves and display cases, holding precious gems, artifacts, and other treasures stolen from humanity. Clayton took all of this in, but remained focused on the pool. He could feel the portal between worlds deep below, obscured by waters. He could also sense Gonchan squirming its way towards the portal. "Coward!" Clayton snarled. The marble hands pulled him across the floor and to the pool. He peered down into the clouded depths, pulling mana from his thread to aid his perception. The portal was distant, but not unreachable. Traveling to it through the boiling water would be dangerous, but possible. It was unlikely to make a difference. Gonchan was faster and closer to the portal. Clayton would not reach it in time. The Godbreaker frowned, frustrated, as he considered unappealing options. He would not get another chance at this. This was a time to act, even if it came at a terrible cost. Removing Gonchan from the pantheon would be worth it. Clayton focused and called a much greater thread of mana through the portal. The torrent rushed into him, coursing through his body and setting his veins on fire. His eyes flared blue, crackles of energy sizzling at the corners. He knelt down, pressing both palms flat against the marble bordering the wall. He could feel the great slabs of it reaching deep into the ground beneath the temple, cradling the pool. Mana began to flow into those slabs, concentrating on unseen fissures. Precious seconds trickled by before a groan rattling through the temple as the slabs began to creak, releasing the water from the pool through 1,000 holes. Steam rose of the roiling water as it swirled away, and Clayton leapt in, following it down into the rapidly draining cistern. Clayton could see the portions of Gonchan's massive form appear from the pool as the great beast was tossed around by the rapidly receding water, drawn away from the portal it so desperately sought to reach. Clayton had studied each of the gods, but seeing them in person always cemented the nature of this task. Each god was a being of terrible beauty. Gonchan was no different. According to his scholars, Gonchan was a hydratic leviathan, a creature of immense size, far beyond those populating Earth. Its natural habitat was the boiling oceans of its own world. It feasted upon almost anything it could reach within its many gaping maws, though it took particular pleasure in objects of worth, particularly those vested with magical properties. The vast shelves in the temple chamber were priceless by any measure, but in this place they were reduced to morsels for the god to dine upon at its leisure. The water continued to drain away, bringing more of Gonchan into view, steam billowing in great gouts around it. But Clayton could see the beast well enough. The center of its mass was an enormous body, mottled brown and oblong. Long, dragging tentacles emerged from it, interspersed with writhing serpentine necks, capped with mouths ringed with rows of gnashing teeth. On the body itself, a dozen oozing, unblinking eyes stared outward at Clayton as he approached. "Who are you to stand before a god?" The words rang out in Clayton, drowning out his thoughts and pushing a compulsion on him to kneel. It was not the first time Clayton had to contend with Godspeak, but it still frayed his nerves. His opened eye saw it for what it was, a forceful but intricate application of mana, and pushed the compulsion aside. Clayton would not bow before a god. "I am the Godbreaker," he replied. He brought his hands up into a steeple before him, gathering a mana blade in the small space between them. Then he drew his left hand downward, pulling a now-formed blade along with it. It extended outwards from his hand by a few feet, a shimmering blue pane of energy. He raised his hand beside his head and then swiped it down in a chopping motion. The blue pane of energy released on the downward swing and flew through the air, meeting the fleshy neck of one of the mouths and severing it. The god squealed, black ichor spraying from the severed mouth. "You should not have come, Gonchan. This is not your world. It is ours!" Another blade slashed out, severing a grasping tentacle in the process of trying to drag Gonchan along the floor of its cistern and towards the portal on the other side. "I am your end. I will feast upon you." A great gnashing of maws followed the words as multiple heads dove towards Clazen. Marble hands reached up and lay a hold of Clazen's feet once again, and he slid along the cistern floor in a half-crouch, occasionally leaping over the drainage holes he had created earlier. As the mouths darted forward, they were dealt with, the mana blade slicing through each, severing in some cases or carving off great heaps of flesh in others. Severed heads began to reform, two maws emerging from the oozing stump. With each additional set of mouths, the corpus of the main body shrank slightly, providing sustenance to form the heads. An ocean of mana flowed through the god as it sustained its attack. The assault was brutal but simple. Gonchan was a beast and followed its natural tendencies. These were understandable and exploitable. Clazen slowly circled the cistern, defending against the head and tentacles as he made his way to the portal. Unlike his own, it was a massive aperture, easily a few hundred feet in diameter. As a gate between worlds, Clazen could not peer beyond its surface, but he could feel the connection to the place beyond. Clazen wished dearly to move through the portal and wreak vengeance on the world beyond, just as Gonchan had done here. But it was not possible. His thread of mana could not follow him there. All he could do was punish Gonchan for coming here. Clazen began to tear at the unprotected edges of the portal, collapsing the rent in the fabric and helping the tear to mend. Gonchan began to emit a kneading wail as the portal began to fragment and dissolve. Clazen had little concept of how gods formed these portals, but he knew creating one was no simple thing even for the gods. Once lost, they became stranded in this world. Captured. Clazen studied Gonchan. Much of its massive body had been fed into new maws. Hundreds of them now swarmed about, snapping futilely at Clazen, who stood beyond the reach. "Feast! Feast! Feast!" Gonchan screamed in his mind. Clazen could feel the rage and hunger in the god. He could also sense the fear. Without the waters, it was growing cold and lethargic. With the new heads, it was draining its energy far faster than normal. It needed food. It needed to escape this cold, miserable place. It would not. While the heads and tentacles flailed and writhed, Clazen gathered pushed mana through his body once again, slowly shaping a ball of energy before him. It took some time to form. It was no simple thing to construct a weapon capable of killing a god. Once the ball had reached a sufficient size, he began to draw it out, pushing energy into an infinitesimally small point of energy, and then flaring out from there into a spearhead. By the time he was done, the mana spear was over 24 feet long, with massive rivulets of power coursing along its length. Dimly, Clazen could sense the draining tank of mana back through the portal and regretted the cost of the weapon. But there was nothing to be done. God hunting was a terribly expensive business. Clazen began to feed mana into the propulsion apparatus at the tail of the spear, loading it with enough energy to travel to and through the god. Only when he was absolutely certain he had done enough to complete the task at hand did he release it. The mana spear shot through the space between him and Gonchan, leaving a brilliant blue streaking after-image in Clazen's eyes. It pierced the great corpus of the god and disappeared in, leaving charred flesh at the entry point. Moments later, Gonchan's body began to pulse blue and white as destructive fire lanced through it, traveling up the necks of the maws and then spraying outwards as it was burned from within. Within moments, the god shuddered, and then was dead. Clazen stared at the beast, hating it. Centuries had passed, with Gonchan weighing upon this land. Countless lives and treasures had disappeared into that being, only for it to demand more. He was the keeper of many things, and it had taken all of them. There was no regaining what had been lost. The mana had been consumed or stored in the world beyond. It would take time for the people of this land to recover. He let out a long sigh. Marble hands reached up and lay a hold of his feet, pushing him up the cistern and away from the great body of the dead god. Another gone. So many still remained. 27, less and greater. Rashjan with the many heads, Nightstealer, Onima, they were all out there, taking from humanity. And Clazen, the Godbreaker, would kill them all. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.